Dear guest, dear Reinhard Bütikofer, thank you so much for holding this roundtable discussion today and the presentation of this study here in our premises, in the representation of North Rhine-Westphalia. It's very cozy here, and that has to do with the complete renovation of our premises downstairs. So if you would come 6 months later, you would have much bigger rooms. But I guess for this event, it's a perfect sitting, and thanks goes to Katrin for organizing this in such a nice way. You could come back. You're welcome. Dear Professor Taube, thank you very much for your interesting study. I know you are very familiar with North Rhine-Westphalian economy and our trade connections, but just to give you maybe a small taste of how Taiwan how important Taiwan is for North Rhine-Westphalia in terms of foreign trade. Taiwan ranks 24th amongst the most important trading partners of North Rhine-Westphalia in 2021. And the trade volume between the two regions amounts to around 3.6 billion euros. So that's some of the latest figures I can give you. In your study, Mr. Taube, you mentioned 3 strategic sectors you identified, and especially the semiconductors and green energy are particularly interesting for us in North Rhine-Westphalia. Of North Rhine-Westphalia's imports from Taiwan, more than 50% fall into the group data processing equipment, electrical and optical products, while more than 50% of our exports are machinery, chemical products, and data processing equipment. And another 9% are pharmaceutical and similar products, which could fall under health, including access to health data, the third core sector you identified. So thus, further deepening of the trade relation in the identified core sectors might be very interesting for North Rhine-Westphalia in the future. Dear Mrs. Hinderer and dear Mr. Wiedenhofer, I'm very curious and looking forward to your view on the EU-Taiwan trade relations. And without further ado, I wish us all a very interesting event this afternoon, and now I would like to give the micro to Mr. Bütikofer. Sorry.
Thank you, Rainer Steffens, for your words of welcome. I think North Rhine-Westphalia can do better than having Taiwan on place 24. So when we come back, I want to hear a different number. Welcome everybody else also. Thanks for joining us. And as this event is being web streamed, we will also have people online following the conversations. I want to welcome in particular, apart from our speakers, the other co-authors of the study that we're discussing, because we have Professor Weil and we have Professor Gottwald and Professor Taube, who collaborated on presenting that study. And it's a great honor that you join us for this conversation. So you sit back and let your colleague do the talking. On other occasions, we had it the other way around. I'm also grateful that Adeline Hinderer is joining us, who leads the team in charge of trade relations with China, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Macau, and Mongolia at the European Commission's DG Trade. We printed a short CV of her on a flyer so that I don't have to read all of that to you. And the same applies to Benedikt Wiedenhofer, who joined the International Relations Department of Business Europe in February 2018, and he works on China, Africa, EU, UK relations, development-related issues, and the implementation of EU free trade agreements. quite a portfolio. Thank you also for joining. And of course, last but certainly not least, Markus Taube, who is the chair for East Asian Economic Studies and China as a faculty member of the Mercator School of Management at the University of Duisburg-Essen in North Rhine-Westphalia. He's also the vice director of the In East Institute of East Asian Studies at this university, as well as the co-director of the Confucius Institute Metropolis Ruhr. Now, the study will be discussed in this format for the first time today, but the study was finished a while ago, and we have already had the chance of also sharing printed versions of the study when a delegation of the Intercommittee of the European Parliament visited Taiwan in the last year. And we found quite some interest, and just 2 days ago, I think, I met with a Taiwanese representative, Ambassador Chen, and he reiterated that there is indeed an interest in Taiwan also in this conversation. So we're not just moving unilaterally. We hope to be building a common discourse on how to improve EU-China, EU-Taiwan relations together, not playing one against the other, but also not holding back in developing Taiwan relations because of whatever concerns or sensitivities people might have. I think I should stop here, not to steal the precious time, and would now turn it over to you, Professor Taube, for presenting the work that you've done with your two colleagues, and then I will invite Ms. Hinderer and Mr. Wiedenhofer to give comments, and then it's for everybody to join in. So please, Mr. Taube.
I have this one, yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Let's start. Welcome, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. Join you in this discussion and present in a quick one some of the results of our study. As mentioned before, it's with Steffi Weil and Jörn-Carsten Gottwald, and we work together on this thing, and we think there's a lot of potential to continue in this vein and go on. I'm just trying to stop myself and get the clock running. Okay, so here we go. Let me start with this. I mean, resilient supply chain agreements, what are they for? You know, usually you have this kind of contract in order to anticipate risks in the economic interaction between economies. You want to minimize exposure, and of course you want to minimize damage in various ways. And this is one contractual arrangement by which economies can try to cope with the vagaries, with the risks, with the rising insecurity in the global system and deal with that. So it is a comparatively new arrangement, contractual arrangement, and is something which might be employed much more. Why a resilient supply chain agreement with Taiwan? I mean, there are a couple of reasons. There are push and pull factors. The European Union certainly has realized a need to reassess its strategic dependencies, establish resilient, much more resilient supply chains than before, to highlight cooperation with trustworthy partners, redefine its global role, and that, of course, especially in the Indo-Pacific. If we look just especially on Taiwan, what do we see? I mean, Taiwan has been kind of neglected for long years. I mean, it's been outshone by China, by mainland China, the economic miracle, the rise of China. And I think we kind of forgot, or it's a kind of an oversight, what happened on this little island, which turned into a stable democracy, which turned into a very powerful economy, and is a key player in future industries and in the innovation of key future technologies. Therefore, there is an economic imperative. Taiwan is deeply embedded in the global division of labor. If we just look at the global supply chains, then Taiwan is much more integrated in these than any other major player. It's a highly valued global partner in these supply chains. It's a technology leader in certain future industries. And it has also initiated a process of green transformation. So something we are dealing with as well. We do have an normative imperative as well. Taiwan has proven itself to be a really reliable, like-minded partner. It's sharing our values and norms. It features a strong democracy, and it is a highly competitive market economy, something you do not really find that often in Asia. And, well, let's simply mention that Taiwan is facing an existential threat from the mainland. So what would an RCA do? Well, it would further improve the framework for investment business activities in Taiwan for European players. It would facilitate full utilization of the potential of bilateral economic ties, strengthen the resilience of the Europeans' global supply chains, and, of course, it would bolster up a like-minded partner in the global system. There are foundations to build on. Taiwan is a member of WTO and as a regional capacity, and as a member of WTO, Taiwan has signed a couple of agreements which mainland China did not sign. And these actually provide a strong foundation for a norms-based, shared values approach to strengthen ties with Taiwan and intensify economic interaction. We do have mutually established representation offices. We have a variety of societal and economic exchanges between our two societies, but as a matter of fact, a sophisticated dialogue structure is simply not there. We do have a couple of dialogues existing on the EU level, but it can be much more structured. It can be substantially intensified. I've got the impression that all these dimensions of interaction have been kind of overshadowed by European vested interests in China, in mainland China, and that sometimes we are kind of distracted by the threats of a one-China policy, which are brought up by Beijing. And then, of course, this is also something we have to look into. We have a lot of red tape in Taiwan, some of that in Europe as well, but there's on this day-to-day operational basis, there's also a lot which can be improved, and where an RSCA also might be a trigger to promote an improvement in the foundations and infrastructure of exchanges. One thing which is probably in the mind of everybody, just looking at the news we get these days, is the idea of a silicon shield of Taiwan. The silicon shield, which is protecting Taiwan from any aggressive or non-friendly moves from beyond the strait. Well, there is a silicon shield, which is a semiconductor industry in Taiwan, which makes it bolsters its positions. But we must keep in mind the silicon shield is not just there. It's not there and it will be there for the next 100 years. Certainly not. It must be maintained, it must be readjusted, and it must be reinvented eventually over time. And that implies that Taiwan is in need of catering to its partners. So Taiwan has every incentive to provide European high-tech and future-oriented industries with propitious investment environments, with high investment transparency, IPR protection, lucrative long-term business perspectives, etc. And it is in Taiwan's own interest to intensify relations and create the necessary framework conditions in their country. So Europe can capitalize on that by offering high-level cooperation and one that promotes win-win partnerships. And that would stabilize and strengthen resilience of the European Union supply chains, and at the same time, it would strengthen the silicon shield of Taiwan. It's a classical, standard win-win constellation which we're talking about here. And actually, when you're looking at what is happening in Taiwan, the policy initiatives, there's a lot going on, going directly in this direction. Taiwan government has got a couple of initiatives which are doing exactly that, improving the investment business environment for foreign players. Just mentioning a couple of programs here: 5+2 industrial innovation and leading enterprise R&D, deep circulation, cultivation, etc., etc. Let's not go into detail. The important thing is that we have a couple of initiatives which are doing that, which have shown the sensitivity of Taiwanese government to go in this direction and take action. When we talk about initiating RCAs, then we must look for a starting point. And the starting point certainly is the identification of shared visions for the future. And these certainly do exist. If you just look at those sectors which are understood and communicated as of strategic importance in the European Union as well as in Taiwan, then you see a lot of matches, a lot of interfaces where you see that both sides understand the future to be quite similar, to have similar ideas of where the train is going, where the future is lying. And that implies that once again, we can capitalize on that and try to match strength of Europe with strength of Taiwan. We are not talking about matching weaknesses. We are talking about matching strengths. And that implies we should go for future-oriented technologies and industries as identified in both regions. We should focus on strategic technologies and industries at risks in order to start and initiate this kind of RCA programs. In our study, we identify 3 launching paths or 3 industries where we think we find the best investment to output ratio, the best framework conditions to start this kind of thing. It's of course the semiconductor industries plus rare earths. Rare earth should not be forgotten, is a major input for the semiconductor supply chain as well. So we talk about more or less the same thing, kind of. Well, why semiconductors and rare earths? Well, we do have a global race for semiconductors, advanced semiconductors. If you've had the news this morning, you've seen our friends from the Netherlands have initiated new sanctions against mainland China, etc., etc. ASML is the key player in this value chain. Without ASML, no advanced semiconductor can be produced. Taiwan has got TSMC, which is the fab, the player to produce these super advanced chips. Nobody else can do it. So these are keynotes for such a partnership, and we should make use of these. At the same time, while this might be the pull thing, we also have a push thing, and that is that the Chip 4 Alliance, initiated by the United States, trying to bring in Taiwan, South Korea, Japan in an alliance, would control about 70% of the value added in the semiconductor supply chain. And this is not integrating European interests. So if Europe wants to have a voice in this, we must act quickly and become part of these major blocks which are right now being constituted in the semiconductor value chain. What to do? Look for Taiwanese firms' diversification. Right now, we have very little in Europe. We have lots of potential for cooperation in the field of rare earths. How? Try to find access to the CHIPS 4 Alliance, to US-Taiwanese networks in general, attract Taiwanese semiconductor industry to Europe, seek cooperation in greening of supply chains, especially regarding rare earths, and something I personally would like to stress is the notion of third country cooperation projects where firms from both countries meet in a third one in order to establish manufacturing, production, R&D activities, exploration activities, etc. So where both parties join hands, bring their respective competencies together, together with a third partner to establish something new. The second launching pad we would suggest is green energy. Both economies, both regions have a strong focus on a green transition, and both have substantial experience and existing structures already. They are joint interests to contain energy dependencies. 98% of energy consumed in Taiwan is imported. We don't have to discuss this. There's a massive need for a reorganization of energy supply, of the greening of Taiwanese energy supply, and therefore a green transformation. What to do? Cooperation and participation in Taiwan's investment programs for grid infrastructure, renewable technologies, energy storage, etc., etc. There are a couple of them out there. And they all provide windows of opportunity for European interests to join and become part of this story. Exploration of offshore, onshore wind energy, solar biogas, geothermal, etc., etc. All that is out there as an option. How? Well, improve mutual market access, integrate stakeholders. That's, I think, super important that we bring everybody in there and incorporate greening in our supply chains. And finally, global health. We know that Taiwan is a member of WTO. Well, yes, but Taiwan is not a member of WHO, of the World Health Organization. And we've seen that in the context of the COVID pandemic. And here, more exchange, more learning opportunities from Taiwan would have been extremely helpful. Taiwan is a major player, a competent player in the health industry. It's mastered the pandemic pretty well. And there are lots of opportunities for mutual learning and joint research. Especially, we've highlighted here the aspect of data. The use of data, big data, for the advancement of diagnostic and therapeutical measures. Data, big data is the key for the advancement of new medical progress and improvement of or strengthening of healthy lives. What can we do, or what could be done? We have the EU Global Health Strategy. Taiwan could be integrated here to play a vital role in its implementation. Taiwan has got a very sound track record for dealing in a trustworthy way with data, manage these data and get the most out of these data. And that's a competitive advantage in comparison to other economies. I mean, we do know that mainland China has got a lot of big data activities and big data processing, but we are afraid that these activities are not always up to our moral standards and norms. Taiwan is different, lots of processing power, and that also on shared values with us. How? Eliminate unnecessary restrictions on exports of essential medical goods, increase investment activity, try to strengthen Taiwan's representation in international health forums, and support joint research on issues of public health. So these are the three launch pads which we suggest to start on our RCA from. We do think that there is an urgency to act. Now, there is a China risk. Mainland China may increasingly limit the EU scope of action. There is not only the anti-secession law, which I suggest everybody to read. The contents are quite interesting, and it's tough reading. So we talk about the potential of military action. We talk, which I actually personally do not really believe in, but there is sea and air blockades. We do have secondary sanction initiatives, which have been tried by mainland China already. Look at Lithuania. We talk about third country mediated sanctions, which might address supply of critical resources, etc., etc. So we do not have to go to the nuclear stage. We don't have to go towards a scenario where we have military aggression. Yeah? It can be on a much lower level and still be extremely painful to Taiwan and Taiwan's partners. But there's also another need for urgency, and that is what we call the exclusion risk. The EU must be careful not to be sidelined. The US is asserting very powerfully its global dominance in the semiconductor industry right now. It's in the process of establishing global supply chains in semiconductor industries which are not really taking care of European interests. I mentioned already the Chip 4 Alliance. We have been talking about the US-Taiwan initiative on the 21st century trade. In December last year, 3 months ago, we have seen the foundation of the Taiwan New Eastward Industry Academia Research Consortium Association. Strange name. According to their statutes, it's a bottom-up institution, but it's bolstered up by both governments. So US government is in there, so it's bottom-up, but top-down sanctioned and promoted. So there's a lot going on there, and it's really high time for Europe to act in order to get the foot into the door. So my final slide, what are the policy recommendations we define in our study? Well, initiate negotiations without further delay. Start right away. Push this forward. Build broad support with different services of the EU institutions. Very importantly, bring in industry as a committed stakeholder. I mean, everything stands and falls with industry. They must be in there. They must be a stakeholder. We suggest the prioritization of 3 sectors to start the whole exercise: semiconductors and rare earths, green energy and global health. We suggest to create specific support programs in the fields of joint research, training, education. We are of the opinion that negotiations should be embedded in the existing multilateral structures. Keep them open for third-party participation. I mean, supply chains do have many partners. Yeah, we should go beyond that. Keep it as an open exercise, an open framework. Of course, we must coordinate with the United States, strengthen cooperation with like-minded partners, try to bring them in, and continue the One China policy. We don't want to alienate anybody. We must try to establish a win-win constellation, a win-win which is not just bilaterally defined, but which provides a venue for everybody to be part of the larger story. That's what I wanted to present this morning. Thank you very much. The study is available, I understand, over there. Thank you very much.
Oh.
Okay.
Here in the front. Please, Mrs. Hinderer, you're next. Either you go to the podium if you want, or you can also take a seat and speak from there. And maybe you join us up front also, Mr. Wiedenhofer. So that was, I find a presentation that I think could have created a lot of appetite for going deeper into the matter. I thank you for that. Now I want to, we all want to hear what Commission is commenting. So very grateful that you join us. Please.
Good. Yes. Thanks for having me. Very nice to be able to join on this very topical issue, I would say. I think it's no secret that supply chain resilience is more and more a concern amongst policymakers in boardrooms, following, of course, the disruptions in COVID, but also the increased focus on vulnerabilities when we are too dependent on certain partners or certain suppliers. So this is certainly something the Commission is looking at, and we're very interested in ideas on how we can work innovatively on these issues. And of course, we don't focus only on Taiwan. So, for instance, in the TTC, there is a specific work strand on supply chain as well. I think as a starting point, there is one aspect which is mentioned in the report, but I think is important to recall, is the fact that with Taiwan, we have a very specific situation if we look at the current trade and investment flows. So on the trade side, we have flows that are very focused on semiconductors, both if we look at Taiwanese exports to the EU. So it's a concentration on a small number of products linked to the semiconductor supply chains. So 10% of total exports are semiconductors, and then you have additional related products. And it's the same for Taiwanese imports from the EU. So 20% of the Taiwanese imports are machinery for semiconductors manufacturing. Then you have chemicals that are also used for the semiconductor manufacturing process. So that's quite specific. And then if we look at the investment flows, we have this quite unique situation where we are the first investor in Taiwan, and we have 53.3 billion of stocks in billion euro stocks in 2021. While Taiwanese stocks of investment in the EU are still relatively small. They've been growing a bit, but we are talking about 4% of Taiwan's total outbound foreign direct investment in 2021. So there is an imbalance in terms of the investment flows. So I think from our perspective, we want to widen and broaden the current trade and investment relationship. And we think some of the sectors you mentioned, and in particular green technology, is something that makes a lot of sense. We are aware of Taiwan's green transformation. Now, what to do to address this situation? What can we do? So I take a little bit of exception with the statement that the EU and Taiwan do not have a sophisticated dialogue structure. I think we do. Let me try to give you a few indications on what we are doing, precisely to try to make a difference. And I'll do a bit of promotion for what some other DGs are doing as well. I mean, supply chain go way beyond DG Trade. So DG Grow is working right now on a European Innovation Week. Last one took place in 2018. The next one will take place end of May, early June 2023. And this is really about business-to-business contacts. So you mentioned matching. EU and Taiwanese strengths. We're trying to do that, focusing on strategic sectors. So there's 25 clusters of sectors. There will be sessions on SME, research and innovation, hydrogen. So DG Grow is recruiting right now, but we think that there will be a large number of businesses going with the Commission and participating in these matchmaking events. So we think these are useful, concrete initiatives, and DG Grow in general for many years has had this investment policy dialogue, which covers relevant areas for supply chain. So robotics, SMEs, green transition, skills cooperation. There's quite a few concrete topics there. We are working on the issue of skills as well. I mean, member states are often very active, but at European level, there are discussions on scholarships for engineering students going to Taiwanese universities. DGRTD is quite active as well. So we have this service facility right now promoting Horizon Europe in Taiwan, trying to get Taiwanese partners to be involved. DG Connect has also offered joint research on microelectronics, so design, fabrication, packaging activities, for instance. On DigiTrade side, we are trying to help with promoting Europe as an investment destination. So we've been doing this European Investment Forum that promotes Europe. And it goes also with specific roadshows with sectors going around Taiwan. And I think on the issue of supply chain disruptions, we also have a few strands of work. So DG Grow, as part of this industrial policy dialogue, has been looking on at supply chain monitoring, emergency response, focusing on semiconductors, but also biomedical products. And as part of DigiTrade, we have this new trade and investment dialogue. And we have a working group dedicated to semiconductors that is looking also precisely at exchange of information on semiconductor supply chains. So I think just to give you a sense, and I would also mention the digital dialogue of DG Connect that has a focus on AI and data. So I think we do cover quite a few areas, and we try to make it as concrete as possible. So where I see maybe areas that the study didn't necessarily cover and things we would like to reflect more upon, I think the first one is, given what we're doing already now in the Commission, what would be the added value of this broad agreement? From our perspective, a lot of the things that you mentioned are already taking place or could easily be integrated in the dialogues that we have. So I think that is the question a little bit of added value. Also, when we are thinking about incentives for companies, right? Because supply chains at the end of the day depend on company decisions. So how can we make a difference? I think another challenge maybe is that the study covers really a lot of areas. Some of them are horizontal, so intellectual property, trade and sustainable development, and others are sectoral. And from our perspective, it would be useful to take a bit the business lens and see where are the real impediments for further supply chain cooperation from the business perspective. We're trying to get feedback. There's, of course, a European Chamber of Commerce in Taiwan that gives us some feedback, but we think we could hear more from companies that are not yet active necessarily in trade with Taiwan. And I think from the Taiwanese businesses, sometimes we hear very general concerns about labor laws in Europe, the complexity of Europe and their lack of understanding of how it works. And there's probably something to look at a bit more here to really understand. I think one of the other challenges maybe in the study is that there's really a mix of bilateral issues and plurilateral issues, and I think you even suggest that it could be something open. And for us, of course, you do things maybe differently if you want to do it bilaterally or if it's more of a plurilateral framework. The issue of the Chip 4 Alliance is maybe an issue in itself, a bit self-standing. So that's maybe a bit of something that requires more thinking. As well, maybe the link with the WTO, because the study mentions that there is already ITA, which reduces tariff on high-tech goods. We have the trade facilitation agreement, so both Taiwan and the EU are already implementing some simplified and modernized customs procedure. You mentioned health, but we have also an initiative in the WTO on health, trying to promote trade in this field. So I think maybe also clarification there on the added value compared to the existing multilateral framework. But I think in general, as I said, we welcome ideas. It's a difficult topic, and I think we really look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hinderer. I'm always happy if DG Trade doesn't say no. And you haven't said no. So that gives me hope for the further exchange. Now, please, we hear from the business community.
Yeah, many thanks, Mr. Bütikofer, for inviting us. Very interesting discussions, a very relevant topic, and we've heard many interesting points already. Let me start by saying that European enterprises are currently really struggling to preserve their global competitiveness. After major supply chain disruptions and economic headwinds during the COVID-19 pandemic, European companies are now faced with the consequences of a war in Europe because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And this is an asymmetric shock because the rise in energy costs is much higher in Europe than in other regions. And therefore, European companies are hit much harder by this than American companies or many Asian companies. And on top of this, incentives and subsidies by some of Europe's key trading partners are also redirecting private investment away from Europe. So in this challenging context, companies are striving to build more resilient and diversified supply chains in order to be less vulnerable to future shocks. And for this, of course, they need a policy framework that supports them in doing so. And that would need to include a simplified regulatory framework in the EU single market and also stable relations with our key economic partners. Now, in this context, Taiwan is, of course, a crucial link in the supply chains of many European companies. Although trade with the EU makes up for less than 10% of Taiwan's total trade, Taiwan is a crucial provider of some very important technologies. And we've heard many examples. The key example is, of course, semiconductors, where Taiwan produces over 90% of the world's most advanced chips. However, the EU, of course, runs a persistent trade deficit with Taiwan, and European companies face numerous technical barriers when exporting to Taiwan in some sectors, such as agriculture. And whilst the EU, as we have heard, is the largest investor in Taiwan, Taiwanese foreign direct investment in Europe is relatively limited still. So there is certainly scope for deepening our economic relations and for addressing the barriers that companies on both sides, both European companies in Taiwan and Taiwanese companies in Europe, face. In this regard, the study highlights many relevant areas that we've just heard about, where further cooperation and alignment could indeed benefit both sides and lead to major benefits, really. But when considering how concretely we can deepen cooperation with Taiwan, Business Europe believes that it is important to keep two factors in mind. On the one hand, the economic situation in Europe is very challenging at the moment, and it is likely to remain that way for the foreseeable future as a result of the fact that there is a war in Europe. And second, tensions in the Strait of Taiwan are very high at the moment, and it is not in the interest of companies neither in Europe nor in Taiwan to take that our governments take measures that would increase these measures. And therefore, although European business is certainly in favor of deepening our economic relations with Taiwan, we do not think that negotiating a headline-grabbing agreement is the best way to achieve this. Because we need to ask ourselves if, the thing we want to achieve is deepening our economic ties with Taiwan and improving the framework conditions for better economic exchanges between the EU and Taiwan, or if the aim should be to make a political statement. And if we want to achieve the former, we believe the best way to deepen economic ties with Taiwan and improve the framework conditions for these in the current situation is by intensifying technical cooperation between the EU and Taiwan and striving for concrete deliverables and concrete outcomes that would address technical barriers that companies on both sides face. And we've already heard that the EU has numerous ongoing initiatives in its cooperation with Taiwan. There is the bilateral trade and investment dialogue. There are numerous bilateral working groups on issues such as investment, intellectual property, sanitary and phytosanitary measures, technical barriers to trade, pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, many other initiatives as well that Ms. Hinderer has mentioned. And we believe that this is a good basis which we could build on. We also think that the current situation should help us to aim for more ambitious outcomes in these areas that are certainly necessary. From a business perspective, there are some issues that could be addressed, that should be addressed. One is visas, because it's still difficult for foreign professionals to get work visas and work permits in Taiwan. Another one is customs and trade facilitation. This cooperation in this area could help promote, for example, the digitalization of customs procedures in Taiwan, because often paper copies still need to be submitted, which is, of course, a very burdensome process, especially during the pandemic. It was quite difficult. In the area of technical barriers to trade, cooperation could help promote expanding the use of e-labeling in Taiwan in different sectors, for example, for medical devices. In the area of investment facilitation, cooperation could help streamline approval processes for some investments and projects, because at this point, some investments and projects still require permits from multiple government agencies, and this could certainly be streamlined. In the area of standards, we could cooperate to remove double testing requirements for products that are placed on the market in Taiwan, such as in the electrical engineering sector. And we could also agree on the mutual recognition of conformity assessment bodies. We've heard about data already, and since the levels of data protection are fairly similar in the EU and Taiwan, a data adequacy decision could be contemplated. That would certainly also, as we've heard, help better cooperation in the health sector. And renewable energy is, of course, and we agree, a very important sector where Taiwan needs to expand its capacities, its production of renewable energy to a large extent in order to meet its climate goals. And at the same time, European companies are amongst the leading providers worldwide of relevant technologies. So there we certainly match each other, and we've also heard about barriers that European companies face in this area that should be addressed in order to improve the framework conditions even more. One example is the offshore wind sector, where at this moment caps on offshore wind energy auction prices and local content requirements, but also the need to obtain approvals from multiple national and local government agencies for offshore wind projects slow down and make it more difficult for European companies to engage in this area. So if this were addressed, it would certainly be easier, and mutually beneficial cooperation could be facilitated. And finally, and this has already been mentioned, roadshows could be beneficial for companies on both sides, since both European companies and Taiwanese companies are leaders in many areas that are of key strategic importance in the future, and roadshows in Europe and in Taiwan could help promote these solutions. And this is, of course, a non-exhaustive list. Many more good examples were mentioned in the study, and there are many more good areas for cooperation out there. But to sum up, I would say again that European business is in favor of working towards a closer economic relationship with Taiwan and creating better framework conditions for this. But we believe that in the current context, such closer economic ties are best to be sought through cooperation on technical level, rather than through a more, headline-grabbing agreement. Thank you. And I'll be happy, of course, to answer any questions.
Thank you also, Herr Wiedenhofer. Now, I would propose that we first go back to the presentation and challenge you, Professor Taube, with giving a first response to these two comments. And then I won't go into a panel conversation, but I will open up for everybody. as far as I have heard, there have been two challenges, basic challenges. One, which Mrs. Hinderer posed, I noted down as what would be the added value of such an agreement? Why can't we do all the good stuff that we want to do without going this far? And the other challenge from Mr. Wiedenhofer, well, from a different angle, but with a similar consequence, possibly. Well, let's do whatever we can do, but at any rate, not enrage Beijing. He didn't say it this way, but that's what the message was. So, I mean, would be interested to discuss whether Beijing would be happy with all the proposals you made. If only we would not have an agreement, but it would also be interesting to sort of look at what I consider a certain contradiction in saying, well, not an agreement, but we need a policy framework. How do we guarantee a policy framework without an agreement? Please, I see those as the two challenges. To you, quite tough. Give you our first response, and then everybody else can come in.
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, is this running? Okay. Oh yes. Okay. So actually, I got the same impression. These have been the two challenges, the two modern questions. Well, and my response actually would be quite similar to yours. I mean, leave everything as it is, but intensify contacts. Yeah. So this is what we said here. I mean, we've been everything we are doing is overshadowed by mainland Chinese interests. And then under the radar, we are trying to improve relations with China, with Taiwan, and that's fine. That's fine, but I think we should never underestimate the enormous signaling value of this kind of RCA. It provides not only visibility; it's a signal that there is an open field in business or in business administration. We are talking about the evoked set. If you're looking for a business partner, you have the idea of a couple of players which come up to your mind, and Taiwan is not in our evoked set as a business partner, as a partner in R&D, in a partner of technology cooperation, etc., etc. We must bring Taiwan up into our evoked set. If we think about cooperation in R&D, then we must think about Taiwan, and we don't do that. And this is something which can be triggered by such an RSCA. I think it's a very important one. Next one, it brings much more transparency, reliability, trust in the stability of the regulatory framework of such cooperation. The second part, and the third one is simply it's also a signal to Beijing. It's also a signal to Beijing that Taiwan is important to us. That we are not just playing around, but that this is a valued partner with whom and for whom we are willing to take action. I'll leave it with that.
Okay, that was clear and short. That leaves a lot of space for everybody else to come in. I would encourage everybody, because also there are people online, as you will remember. If you want to take the floor, please identify yourself, maybe say whether you are representing an organization or an institution, and keep it short and sweet. Who wants to, please? Sir.
Hi, Finbar Birmingham. I'm a journalist in Brussels with the South China Morning Post newspaper. I had a question, maybe a technical question for Adeline, because there's been a lot of discussions lately about whether BIA with Taiwan would be, the Chinese say that it would be something that would go against the EU's One China policy. And I just would like to get some clarity from DG Trade. Is it within, do you believe it's within the scope of the European Union to negotiate such an agreement? And I understood that under the previous Commission, there was some sort of steps taken by Commissioner Malmström to maybe explore the scope of a bilateral investment agreement with Taiwan. What's changed since then? Because surely investment conditions have not massively changed between the EU and Taiwan. So I guess why has that moved off the agenda in Brussels?
Thanks, Finbar. I think we should give you the chance to respond immediately, Mrs. Hinderer.
Is it still working? Yeah. I think it's okay. Yeah, it's okay. I think the times have changed, right? Also, when we look at our investment policy. So when this idea was floated, indeed, as part of a former communication, I think two or three commissions ago, the issue was linked to the negotiations on investment with China, and exploring potentially further negotiations with Hong Kong and with Taiwan. So that was some language that was covered there. I think since then our investment policy has changed significantly in the EU. I would say as well that the assessment that we have made is one is an economic assessment on the necessity of the agreement, where we have identified that it's currently not in the cards because we don't see that it will change the situation and it will be required for us. It's not a secret that our companies are already heavily invested. We hear some minor complaints, but we don't think that overall the investment agreement will change the situation. So that's the assessment that the Commission has done. And I think what I tried to explain today is all the other things that we have been doing, which are, in our view, more concrete and having more directly an impact on our investment flows, because they try to really foster this business-to-business angle and focus on very specific sectors and projects.
If I may, I would add that indeed, I think it goes. It's beyond question that Commission has stepped up their efforts of being involved with Taiwan. They have raised the level of the exchange to the Director General level on our side, and initiated quite a few initiatives. So certainly there's no moving away from Taiwan. The question where we're at odds between the institutions is that in the Parliament, we believe it would be necessary, and some of the reasons have been given in the presentations already. But the other part that you did not respond to, Ms. Hinderer, I want to state very clearly, this is well within our One China policy. Taiwan is a WTO member. China has a treaty with them. Others do. We could. That is would in no way be a deviation from that. Very clear. Next. Yes, please.
Good afternoon. Peter Chase, Senior Fellow at the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Thank you very much for the presentation of the paper. I personally think an agreement between Taiwan and the EU is good. You can have lots of different types of agreements. One question is, why is this one so narrow on supply chains? I mean, you could have an agreement that lists 10 things that encapsulates many of the things that the Commission and Business Europe talked about as issues on the agenda to be taken forward. But a more technical question on supply chains. If you're looking at supply chains, you have to look at the entire chain. Value-added trade. And the bilateral trade with Taiwan may not be great. Taiwan's indirect trade could be significant. some of that indirect trade is with and through China. How do you take that value-added trade, that concept, and apply it, including the China concept, in this resilient supply chain agreement?
Thank you, Peter. That goes to you, Professor Taube.
This one, okay. Thank you very much. You're raising a very, very important point there, and the issues you're raising there are not part of the final study, but we've done that in some background material which we have in our computers. No.
Phase 2 agreement.
Yeah. If we just look at evaluated trade, I mean, you're right. China is very important in these things because things go from Taiwan to mainland China, from mainland China back. I mean, 40–50% of Taiwan's foreign trade is exactly that, with mainland China. The question is, does this have to be for the next 20 years? No, I don't think so. I think this is also something which may change in the next couple of years with a reorientation of all of industry with regard to China. We already see that since a couple of years that a lot of these export processing trade activities are moving out of mainland China. Labor costs are rising in China, so a lot of the demand for chips, etc., is moving out of mainland China, going to other destinations. This is a process which has started already. Now you see other movements. You see Honghai, Foxconn moving out of China, out of mainland China, investing in India and other places. So here you see already substantial amounts of, substantial amounts of chip trade, of semiconductor trade being relocated from the Taiwan, mainland China axis towards a Taiwan, India, or other third country axis. So when we are talking about third country corporations, we have this kind of thing in mind, that we have other players, other economies in the region and elsewhere, which command comparative advantages, for example, in labor costs or in market terms, if we talk about India, which may substitute this over-dominating mainland China factor there. Okay? So our idea is really that out-diversification of Taiwanese semiconductor industry out of mainland China is a must in the next couple of years.
Just as a technical matter, if you've already done the study, do you have an idea of how important Taiwan is as a supplier to Europe on a value-added basis? For instance, China is a much larger source of imports for Europe, but I suspect that the value in that trade from Taiwanese chips is actually very high. But do you have even a sense of what it might be?
I can open my computer after the yeah, sorry.
Okay, good, thank you.
Yeah, but please, there's one very important point we must make here. Semiconductor industry is super complex, and where do we have the key advantage of Taiwan? And that is in the fabs, in the production of the chips, and especially the super advanced chips. That's where Taiwan has got this advantage, and not also not in the machinery. I mean, the super best machinery is coming from the Netherlands. Yeah, what the Taiwanese master, in a way nobody else can do it, is to make this work. You know, the operations. So it's intangible in the heads of these people, and how all these minor things work together. This is what they can do, and nobody else can do it like that. So their key advantage is actually these super advanced chips. If we go for less advanced chips, less technologically difficult ones, then mainland China can more or less do it alone, or others. So actually, we should really focus on these TSMCL super advanced chips, the next generation, which is right now being started to be produced, and the coming ones. And one thing, as an economist, let me simply raise this point. The semiconductor industry, the way we have it right now in the global system, should not exist. I mean, perhaps you know Williamson, Nobel Prize winner, and his understanding of the institutions of companies. The supply chain of the semiconductor industry is actually constituted of a series of near monopolies, which is actually not governable. Yeah, it should not exist. It should actually be governed under one roof. So actually, it's so complex, the investment is so high, we should actually have one global semiconductor company, you know? Just joking a little bit, you know? But the idea is really, we have here a real monster of an industry where monopolies are interacting with other monopolies. And that gives it a very, very special touch. Which must then also be reflected in the political response.
Thanks. And I suspect there are more people who want to come in.
Yes, Lynn Gutthaus from the European Institute for Asian Studies. I'm actually very interested by the discussion and also to know a bit more about investments from Taiwan into Europe. So what kind of investments do we want to attract? And I mean, is there already, like you were talking about roadshows, Benedict, earlier, other aspects? So what are we, I mean, actually investing in, and what do we want to attract from Taiwan? And then actually to follow up also on the aspects that have been mentioned about the agreements or technical cooperation specifically, are there any specific sectors beyond the three ones that have been mentioned by the study that actually stand out as future innovation or other things that we want to, I mean, keep on track or keep tracking and actually want to, I mean, maybe be one of the first players in that could be interesting in Taiwan as well? Thank you.
Thank you for both questions. I think Benedict Wiedenhofer, you would be the first addressee for those.
Thank you, and thank you, Lynn, for the questions. I mean, I would say one major area where European industry would be interested in cooperating more with Taiwan is, of course, semiconductors. We've seen major investments in the area of semiconductors from Taiwan in the US recently. There are no similar initiatives in Europe, although there is some discussion about an investment in Germany and some announcement already with regards to Lithuania as well, but by far not to the same extent as we see it in the US. So, of course, considering that Taiwan is really, TSMC is really the leader in the most advanced semiconductors, this is one key area where European industry would be interested. But there are other areas as well, and so I would certainly not limit it to this one sector. With regards to the road shows, this is of course rather relevant for Europe. I mean, from a European business perspective, road shows are mostly relevant for European companies that could promote their technologies, their solutions in Taiwan through these roadshows. But of course, vice versa, they could also be relevant for Taiwanese companies that would like to promote their solutions in Europe. But there, it's not me who is, you know, the one who could tell you which sort of sectors would be interested in that. But from a European perspective, of course, especially there in the area of renewable energies, there is a major interest where roadshows could help promote the solutions that Europe has on offer. Thank you.
Ms. Hinderer?
I can maybe just add a general point from a policymaker perspective. Beyond semiconductors, I mean, the fact that Taiwan is diversifying away from China could be an opportunity. But of course, as mentioned before, their focus has been to move some of their investments and production facilities to India or to the ASEAN countries. Europe is not necessarily on their radar screen. But in terms of the evolution of technologies, it would be important for Europe to be part of the future technologies that will matter, and that's where certain Taiwanese companies could be relevant. So I think there is this idea that attracting Taiwanese companies, maybe not only the big Taiwanese players, but possibly some more smaller players to Europe could be beneficial. And the Taiwanese are indeed very good at these being integrators, high tech engineering, and certainly those are areas that I think in Europe we want to develop more. So from that perspective, there is, I think, a general interest to learn from Taiwan and to see to make sure that Europe is maybe also on their radar screen.
Thank you. Also, we have time for maybe one or two more remarks from the auditorium, and then we can collect final remarks from the podium here. The gentleman in the second row.
Thank you very much for the panel. My name is Jan Leino. I come from the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. I'm not a trade expert myself, so I have a chicken and egg question for the trade experts, both from the Commission and to you, Benedikt. Which comes first, the diminishing of the practical things, so the technical issues, like you put it, or the trade agreement? Which boosts first? Because if I look at Commission's tables, which they publish on social media, they usually publish a table which is, in 5 years since this agreement, it has grown this and this much. So my understanding, chicken or egg, which comes first?
Thank you. If there's another one, I would give somebody else also the opportunity to speak. You're making your notes. Anybody else? Okay, then we start with the final round of remarks. You go first, Mr. Wiedenhofer, please.
Thank you, Jana, for this question. Well, I wouldn't say necessarily that one has to come first. There are different ways in which you can address the same issue. When it comes to trade liberalization as such, of course, you can't take a piecemeal approach because it needs to be, if you want a trade agreement, it needs to be to liberalize substantially all trade, so about 90% of tariffs or of trade needs to be covered, otherwise it's not WTO compliant, at least between developing countries. So there you cannot have a piecemeal approach. But when it's about technical barriers that companies face in a given market, you don't necessarily, I mean, these can be addressed through a trade agreement along with other issues, but a trade agreement is not necessary to address these. You can also address these through technical cooperation. And in that regard, the EU and Taiwan have a lot of suitable structures in place that can serve to help address these issues. And it's of course good to hear that, of course, the Commission has recently also increased the momentum and also the political commitment and the level of policymakers that participate in these exchanges. So there is quite some potential that these dialogue structures have, and quite a lot can be achieved through these structures. Thank you.
Maybe I would just add a general comment there that when we look at trade and investment agreements, I think the value of those is higher the more protectionist the partner is, right? Because you want to remove barriers with these agreements. And that's why we focus on India, and now we're looking at Thailand, Malaysia, because they are a lot of problems, a lot of high barriers that a trade agreement will enable us to lower. And I think that's why we've developed economies like Taiwan, where there is already substantial trade and investment flows. We tend to look at different types of ways to address issues. Often we're talking about more regulatory cooperation or technical barriers to trade, which is about understanding, certain policies that create a problem. I mean, right now we know that Taiwan is looking at CBAM and trying to see what it means for their framework, maybe drawing some inspiration as they develop their own framework. So that's why I think we have to really think about what is the right tool to address the specific issues that we see with Taiwan. Hence my question on what are the business impediments and what are the sectors that we want to foster and how to do that. And I think, again, energy, green tech has been mentioned a lot, but also because it's a very topical issue and one that everybody's focusing on right now. So yeah, I think we have to. There's not one size fits all when it comes to policies, and we really have to see what works best in this case.
I think the question has been answered very, very nicely already. But in a nutshell, it's about transaction costs. These kind of arrangements reduce transaction costs and make it. They smoothen trade and investment processes, and of course, the larger the gap, the larger the difference, the higher the gain you can achieve. But let me simply say, I mean, yes, with Thailand and others, we do have a large gap, or a lot of transaction cost reductions which can be achieved looking at the regulatory red tape and all these other aspects. Well, with regard to Taiwan, where on the regulatory front we are quite advanced, but there we can reduce the transaction costs on the political side. The political transparency, what I said about this evoked said, the transparency, the trust in the rule system, etc. This is where we can make points, where we can reduce transaction costs.
Thank you, Professor Taube. Thank you, Ms. Hinderer. Thank you, Mr. Wiedenhofer. I think that was a very, very encouraging conversation, because we're contributing, I think, with this kind of exchange to a goal that was motivating us when we commissioned the study, namely to move beyond a relatively stale contradiction between, will we get a BIA or do we have to stick to piecemeal measures? So the question is, are there other alternatives? Can we think creatively? And we sometimes have to look around and see that others are also acting creatively. The negotiations between Taiwan and the United States over a 21st century trading framework, that's a creative approach. And I think we should not hesitate to be at least as flexible in how we try to strengthen our role in trade as they are. So that effort in itself, I think, is very helpful to. Of course, the European Parliament, I don't know how often, maybe 5 times, maybe 3 times, has clearly expressed its will, and with an overwhelming majority, including support from all the democratic groups in the European Parliament, that we should have a BIA. Now, I see that, frankly, the Commission is not about to go in that direction for reasons that have been more or less explicit. Nor do I think that member states would push very hard to change Commission's position on that. Question is there scope for doing something below that range, but still doing something that would create a framework, an agreed framework to stabilize that relationship. And I think the next steps in this conversation, and of course I would be interested in continuing it, could be to have a feedback from Taiwan, for instance, how they look at this. A next step in the conversation could be to really compare the scope of some of the measures that you described, Mrs. Hinderer, that the Commission is already employing, and the proposals that are made in the study. On a facts-based level, to say, well, is the scope just coextensive? I mean, if the scope would indeed be coextensive, why go the extra mile? But if it is not, maybe going the extra mile would be worth it. The last remark I wanted to make is this. Clearly, there are 3 goals that we would like to achieve with this kind of a conversation and this kind of a proposal, if it could be realized. One is helping our own economy. Second is also helping the partnership, the economic partnership with Taiwan. But certainly a third goal is indeed also strengthening the political partnership with Taiwan. Because indeed, Taiwan is under fatal threat. And I cannot just shy away from that fact and say whatever might enrage Beijing cannot be considered. If that would be the rule, then we should recommend that Taipei hands over the island tomorrow morning. I mean, this is a bit stark, but this is what it amounts to. And we should understand that a discussion about trade is not just about trade. It's also about the role of trade in geopolitical relations and the role of trade to foster our own values and not just our own goal, our own interests. And in that regard, I think we can also continue the conversation. I'm very grateful to your contribution, to your attendance, to your questions, and if you find this worthwhile, please spread the gospel. Thank you very much.